guys, today's video is on the Spanish language rudiment terms in different regions that speak Spanish, which I had other videos like this before. You can go check them out. I have one on German language names and one on Italian language names. And this is going to be the Spanish language names. So we're going to talk about the rudimental terms from Spain, from Mexico, from Colombia, Argentina, and the region of Bajo Aragon, which is different than the rest of Spain. These aren't the only places that have rudimental drumming in the Spanish language world, but they are the ones I know the names of and can tell you about with some authority. So this is going to be, they're actually more similar between Spanish-speaking regions than they were between Italian-speaking regions and German-speaking regions. But there is some variation, and we'll talk about it. So just like the other two languages that we did, the only word that everyone agrees on universally across the board is the word for the open double stroke roll. To the extent that everyone has an open double stroke roll, Mexico really doesn't. But they use the same word for the roll that they do have, and that word is redoble. That means a roll in every Spanish-speaking region that I'm aware of. Now, in the word for flam, there's not a lot of variation, but there's a little bit, and I think it's funny because it's based on handwriting misconceptions. So the word in Spain, Mexico, and Colombia is plow, P-L-A-U, plow. And that word in Spain actually is sometimes spelled as plan, P-L-A-N, and I think that's a mistake because when you write in cursive, U and N, depending on the spacing of your loops, can look almost identical. And so when it's spelled plan with an N, that's just a misreading of plow. But in Argentina, they call it a plan, like in printed, text, because I think they misread some earlier Spanish source. And so the Spanish messed it up themselves. Of course, the Argentinians can also mess it up too, I guess. But the word for this in Bajo Aragon, which is inside of Spain, is actually mordiente de una nota. So like, it's basically a single grace note, more or less. They don't subscribe to this plow business.
I don't know what happened to the video clip for this one, but I was also going to talk about the drag or the rough. In Spain, they call it a rao. In Mexico, they call it a rao. In Colombia, they call it a rao de tres. And in Argentina, as usual, they call it a ran de tres, just because they got to do that. And they don't really seem to have this rudiment in Bajo Aragon, but you can see that the places where they do have it, it's almost exactly the same name. So it's kind of like redoble in that it's extremely common, but there's just a subtle tweak on the spelling and whether they have to suggest that it has 3 notes or not. So I don't know what happened to this clip either, but this is for the open flam or the charge stroke. In Spain, it's called the tirao, and that's actually one of the first places after France in Europe to have a documented type of charge stroke or open flam. In Mexico, they don't really have it. In Colombia, they just call it a tau, which is what most people call in Spanish the single stroke. They have to be different, I guess. Argentina, they call it a tron, which of course has an N in it because that's just a theme that's going on with Argentina. And in Bajo Aragon, they don't really have this either.
We look at the single stroke. That is called tau in Spain, and it's called tau in Mexico, and it's called tan in Argentina, and again, at some points in Spain it was called tan, and that N, that's a handwriting thing again. In Colombia, though, it's called the golpe de la baqueta, which is totally separate. I think that Colombia has a little bit more Italian influence in its drumming than some of these other places, and so that's pretty similar to what the Italians would call, in some regions, like a colpo di baqueta, like golpe de la baqueta. See how it's very similar? So the Sicilians, I think, subscribe to sort of the Sardinian Italian state drumming a little bit more so than the Spanish. Anyway, we move on to the 5-stroke roll. That's called a rao tau in Spain. It doesn't really have a good name in Mexico. It's called the rao de cinco in Colombia. And in Argentina, again, the U and the N, it's called a ran de cinco. And finally, the last one that has multiple countries that we can compare is the 9-stroke roll. That's called a redoblillo in Spain, and it's really anything bigger than a 5-stroke is called a redoblillo in Spain. It could be a 7-stroke, 9-stroke, 13-stroke, we don't know, right? But it would be under that category. Mexico, again, doesn't really have a good name for the 9-stroke roll specifically. Colombians call it a rao de nueve. And the Argentinians, again with the U and the N, call it a ran de nueve. The Bajo Aragon region has a name for this one. This is the last one that they actually meet up with any other system. They call it a redoble de negra, and that refers to the note itself. It's like a quarter note, typically, is how you would play a 9-stroke roll, even here in the United States. And so when they have a quarter note and it's filled in, they call it, it's black on the page, redoble de negra. So a longer roll to them would be a redoble de blanco, because it has a hole in it and you can see the white of the paper through the note. Right? That's what they're referring to as like a quarter note roll rather than a 9-stroke roll. So the big takeaway we can have from this list is that, as you would expect, the Spanish military system had a huge effect on all of these other Spanish-speaking countries, because of course they were all younger. Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, they're all like former Spanish colonial possessions, and of course they brought the rudiment names with the Spanish language with them when they set up their rudimental systems when they became independent countries. And this of course happened like hundreds of years after Spain colonized them, and Spanish drumming goes all the way back into like the 1600s. There's documentation of some of it. So they really they set the bar, and everyone else kind of followed that. Redoble, plow, row, to row, tau, these are all essentially accepted, except for that UN thing, most places, except Bajo Aragon, which is on its own program because it's a civilian style, like we talked about in the Italian video. The like Carnaval de Ivrea has its own style of drumming, and it's a civilian style. Well, the Bajo Aragon drumming is actually for the, what do they call it, Semana Santa, which is the Saint Week, the Holy Week, and it's like these processional things, and so it's a totally different style of drumming with totally different words because it's not a military style. And that is the real big difference I see between a lot of these different things, is when it's not a military style, everything's out the window, it's on its own program. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.